So, hello all of you. We shall be seeing with, we shall start the lesson again, one more lesson. That is the human respiratory system. Human respiratory system we're going to be starting, and we have already completed two lessons, right? So, we have seen the introductory aspects of the breathing and exchange of gases and various respiratory organs. Various respiratory organs also we have seen. Now we're going to be discussing about the human respiratory system and various parts associated with the human respiratory system. How this breathing pattern occurs, what are the various organs, it's a system, right? It's a system. What are various organs that are involved? So I have drawn a representational diagram so that it makes it gets easy for us to be understanding of the human respiratory system. Now, to begin with the human respiratory system, right? To begin with the human respiratory system, what is the organ which allows the air into the body? Which allows the air into the body is, so we have this external organ called as nose, right? We have this external organ called as nose. What does it contain? What does it contain is, so this nose contains nostrils. This nose contains nostrils, or simply you can call them as the nares, right? This nose contains nostrils or the nares. Yes, and these nostrils lead into a cavity-like structure called as the nasal cavity. That a cavity-like structure called as nasal cavity. Nasal cavity, and the nose and this nasal cavity, right? The nose and this nasal cavity are made of these various skeletal elements. Various skeletal elements to support. What are the skeletal elements is, the nose is simply made of. The nose is made of skin and cartilage. Cartilage, right? Skin and cartilage. If you see, as a matter of fact, the tip of the nose contains this cartilage called as the elastic cartilage. That is why you would be able to twist and turn. You would be able to twist and turn this nose, right? So we have this elastic cartilage in the tip of the nose, and obviously it is covered by the skin. And when you go to the nasal cavity, right? So when you go to the nasal cavity is divided into two chambers. The nasal cavity is divided into two chambers by something called nasal septum. This is what we are speaking of here, right? So this is what we are speaking of here. Somewhere here you will have this nasal septum dividing the nasal cavity into two chambers, right? The nasal septum, and this nasal septum is made of this cartilage called as the hyaline cartilage. When you touch your nose, you can actually feel this cartilage, that is the hyaline cartilage. Right behind this nasal septal cartilage, we have this bony skeletal elements. Made of these bones, right? The skull bone, that is ethmoid bone, right? Ethmoid bone, and the bone that is found in the nose is the vomer. right behind this nasal septum. Nasal septum, you have this ethmoid bone, and you also have the vomer. So these are all the bones that are present in here, right? And apart from this, on the lateral walls, right? On the lateral walls of the nasal chambers, right? On the lateral walls. On the lateral walls, we also have these bony elements. We also have these bony elements or bony structures. We also have these bony structures called as conchae. Right? So these are all bony structures called as conchae. These are actually the part of ethmoid bone itself. Right? So these are part of the ethmoid bone itself. There are three kinds of conchae will be there: superior and inferior conchae, and one more set of conchae is there. So what do they do? What do they do is, that is, ethmoid bone have three kinds of conchae. What do they do is, so these conchae, so these kind of increase the turbulence of air. What are they doing? They increasing the turbulence of the air. So when the air has come into this nasal cavity, they are increasing the turbulence. What does that mean, increasing the turbulence here is? So this air that is coming into the nasal cavity is bounced around, right? Is bounced around in the nasal cavity, so that what are the dust particles? What are the dust particles? Are some kind of microorganisms which are present in the air that is coming into the nasal cavity, are trapped in the nasal cavity itself, right? Are trapped in the nasal cavity itself. How will they be trapped? So how will these organs will be trapped? How will they be trapped here is, this nasal cavity walls, right? This nasal cavity walls are lined by this nasal epithelium, right? Is lined by this nasal epithelium, and this nasal epithelium has mucus secreting glands. It has the mucus secreting glands, right? So with the help of this mucus secreting glands, the mucus traps. So mucus is being secreted, and this mucus traps the incoming microorganisms, the incoming dust particles. And what other substances still more found in this nasal cavity is, you would also found cilia, right? So this nasal epithelium actually is the ciliated epithelium, right? This nasal epithelium is actually the ciliated epithelium. And what does the cilia do? This cilia, moves these particles to the throat, so that it can be coughed out, so that the dust and other particles, if it is microorganisms, sometimes they are just swallowed in. Microorganisms, they are swallowed in along with the mucus. In such a situation, it will be taken to the pharynx with the help of this moving cilia. In such a situation, the microorganisms, when they go into the stomach contains all these acids, right? The acid nature of the stomach is sufficient to break this down, right? So that is the function of the nasal epithelium, which is the ciliated epithelium, which also contain this mucus secreting glands. And we'll just recap what we have discussed here. What we have discussed here is, we are seeing the structures of nasal cavity. We are in the initial part of the nasal, upper respiratory tract itself. All of this is the respiratory tract. We are in the initial part of it only. We are just seeing the foremost organ, that is nose. We are seeing the foremost organ, that is nose, and we have seen what does this nose contains. It contains nostrils and nares, right? It leads to the nasal cavity, and this nose made of the skin and cartilage, and we have seen what kind of cartilage is it made of. The elastic cartilage, yes. And we have seen the nasal cavity, so it is divided into two chambers. It is divided into two chambers with the help of the nasal septum, right? With the help of the nasal septum, and this right behind this nasal septum, we have this bony skeletal elements in the form of this ethmoid bone and as well as vomer to support the nasal cavity and as well the nose, and apart from these two, we also have these bony elements called as conchae. Conchae is a part of the ethmoid bone itself. What is the function of this conchae? Is they increase the turbulence, right? They increase the turbulence so that the air is bounced around. So as the air is getting bounced around, all these dust particles and incoming microorganisms are being trapped. How will they? How are they trapped? How will they be getting trapped? So they will be getting trapped with the help of the mucus. The mucus which is being secreted by this nasal epithelium, which contains this mucus secreting glands, and this nasal epithelium is actually the ciliated epithelium, which has the mucus, so that all these dust particles can be trapped, and as they move to the throat, through the throat, so that they can be coughed off, so that just spat out from the throat itself. Yes. So those are the upper respiratory part structures. So we shall be continuing the next part, that is the pharynx. So if you see the diagram, so we have seen the nose, and the air has been allowed here, right? It comes here, and the air has been allowed into the nasal cavity. In the nasal cavity, we have seen all this elastic cartilage, all this vomer, and the conchae, right? The conchae, and as well as ethmoid bone, and the bone that we have here is the frontal bone, and this also has a supportive role to the nose. Yes. And after that, so it leads to the next part that is there. The next part is the pharynx. So we're going to be seeing about the pharynx in our next part. Yes, so hope we are clear. I shall be erasing this. So the next one that we have is the pharynx, right? So this area that we have here, right, this entire area that we have is the pharynx region. So obviously we know the pharynx is the common passage for food and air, right? It's a common passage for food and as well as air. If you see here, so we have this nasal cavity and we have this oral cavity. We have this nasal cavity and we have this this entire structure. What you are seeing here is, this is this is your tongue. This is the nasal cavity, right? So that is the nasal cavity, and what you are seeing here is, so this is the palate. At the floor of the nasal cavity, what you find is, you find the palate. If you see the digestive system, you must have read already about this, right? The roof of the oral cavity has the palate, and the floor of the nasal cavity has the palate. Obviously this palate has two structures. right? The palate will have two structures. There is a hard palate and then there is soft palate, right? There is a anteriorly towards this end, you will have the hard palate, and towards the posterior end, what we have is, we have this soft palate. And the nasal cavity, towards the end of this nasal cavity, what we have here is, so we have this internal nares. In a way, you can say that, the nasal cavity begins with the external nares. The nasal cavity begins with the external nares, ends with the internal nares, right? It is beginning with the external nares, ending with the internal nares, and these internal nostrils open into the pharynx. Simply, they open into the pharynx, and the pharynx region now. The pharynx region has three parts, as a matter of fact. Three parts, and so a part which is on the upper side here, which is close to the nasal cavity, is called as the nasopharynx. It is called as nasopharynx, and where there is this oral cavity region is called as oropharynx. And wherever this larynx is there, right? So this part is actually the larynx of the respiratory system. Wherever this part is there, and it is called as laryngopharynx. I'll just write that here. Laryngopharynx. Right? So three regions. So it is the common passage, and this has three regions, right? So nasopharynx, and we have this oropharynx, and we have this laryngopharynx, and it's a common passageway. And if you see, it is allowing the tubes to pass, right? If you see from that here, so the tubular system is coming down, and it is opening into the tracheal tube. You see, it got opened into the larynx, right? So larynx, on the larynx, we have this one more structure called as the glottis. Larynx has the structure called as the glottis. Above this glottis, we have this flap of tissue. Above this glottis, we have this flap of tissue. This flap of tissue is called as the epiglottis. What does this epiglottis do is, when the food is being swallowed, right? When the food is being swallowed, you can see that here, oral cavity, the food has been taken. When you swallow the food, you see it is coming down here like this. The food, right? The food is coming down here. Then it goes to the abdominal cavity. It goes across this, and here you will have this abdominal cavity where the food is being taken there. And so as you swallow, you have this epiglottis. This epiglottis slides over this. You can see that here. This epiglottis slides over this and closes off this respiratory tract. Right? Closes off this respiratory tract, so that the food doesn't go into the lungs. If the food accidentally goes into the lungs, it might as well kill the person. So it's a preventive mechanism. That's where the flap of tissue which covers, so when the food is being swallowed. So here, in this part, when you have two tubes, which tube is the anterior one, which tube is the posterior one? Is, you can see, so towards this end, here anteriorly, what tube is placed? The tube that is placed is the trachea. That is windpipe, and posteriorly the tube that is placed is the esophagus. So this is the esophageal tube. So anteriorly you will have trachea and posteriorly you will have the esophagus tube. Yes, that is the pharynx. So as you can see in the pharynx, what we have? We have the nasopharynx, and we have the oropharynx, and then we have the laryngopharynx. Right, 3 pharynx regions. In this region, the pharynx region, as a matter of fact, we have this accumulation of tonsils. Tonsils are the lymphoid tissue. Tonsils are the lymphoid tissue, and if there is any swelling of tonsils, if there is any, we have different kinds of tonsils. We will see when we discuss the digestive system what kinds of tonsils are there. Different kinds of tonsils are there. If there is a swelling of tonsils, we would call this condition as tonsillitis. Right? We would call this condition as the tonsillitis. Tonsillitis is the condition where there is a swelling of tonsils. As a result of that, these internal layers are there. No, this internal layers is partially closed off. Partially is closed off as a result of this swelling. Especially in young children. So this tonsillitis problem is being experienced. Yes. So that is the pharynx, which is the common passageway for the respiratory and as well as the digestive system. So 3 kinds of regions we have identified. So the next part that we have is the larynx. The next part that we have is the larynx, right? So where is this larynx? The larynx is above trachea. The larynx is above trachea. What does it do? Is it's a voice box, right? It's a voice box. Why are you calling it as a box, right? So it is made of all these different cartilages. Right? We have made of all this. It is made of all these different cartilages. So what are these cartilages? The biggest of them is called as the thyroid cartilage. The biggest of all these cartilages in this box-shaped cartilages. The biggest one is called as the thyroid cartilage. So that is what I have highlighted here. So it's actually the biggest. That is why in males in the neck region, you would see this prominence, right? So it is protruding. So you would see this protruding prominence, right? So this protruding prominence is called as the Adam's apple, right? So mostly it is misunderstood as it is only found in men. In fact, it is found in both genders. Right? In fact, it is found in both genders. It is found in men and it is found in women as well. But the only difference here is, this voice box contain the vocal cords. Right? This voice box contain these vocal cords, vocal ligaments or vocal cords, and these are larger. In males, kind of smaller in females. They're made same. Females does have the vocal cords, thyroid cartilage, and all of those. But they are not that bigger. They are not that bigger in the case of the females, but they are still present. They are not that prominently seen. In the case of the females. The smaller vocal cords, produce produce high pitch sound. That's why the females will have a high pitch sound. The females will have a high pitch sound, and males will have much deeper voice, right? Not high pitch, much deeper voice is due to because of the presence of differences in the arrangement of the vocal cords, which are present in the larynx region. And how does the sound is being produced? Is when sound is being produced, these vocal cords vibrate, right? There is vibration of these vocal cords. As a result of that, sound is being produced. I mean, the tongue also will give this articulation, right? Will give this articulation to the sound that is being produced, right? I mean, the vocal cords and tongue and all of these coordinated organs will produce the sound, and this larynx has a very important role in doing that, right? And apart from the thyroid cartilage, we also have smaller cartilages such as cricoid cartilage and something called cuneiform cartilage, right? So other smaller cartilages are there, and the biggest of it is the thyroid cartilage, which is called as the Adam's apple. And we have seen on top of the importance of glottis and as well as glottis and epiglottis that we have understood. Yes, and the next part is trachea. That is the windpipe. So we shall be studying about the trachea in our next part, right? This is the part, and please do recall what you have seen in this lecture, right? So in this lecture, to revise what you have seen is, we have seen the nose, we have seen the nasal cavity, right? We have seen the nasal cavity and their functions, then we have understood the larynx. Each of them has very important functions to play, and nasal cavity has so many important functions to play in terms of how it humidifies the air. Say for example, when you are in air conditioned room, and the average temperatures there is 18 to 20, a maximum of 22, right? So body temperature is 37 degrees centigrade. In such a situation, when you inhale the air, what you are inhaling is, you are inhaling the moist air, right? We are inhaling the moist air, and this moist air cannot be taken into the body. It should be brought to the normal body temperature. And here, the kind of temperature regulation is happening in the nasal cavity. The temperature regulation is happening in the nasal cavity. When the turbulence is happening there, the regulation is happening in the nasal cavity. And we have seen the functions of the larynx as well. Just to remember the anatomical aspects, the functions of each of these, right? The various regions of pharynx and the nasal cavity, palate, oral cavity, how it is being separated. Sometimes you see people inhaling through their nose. Sometimes we have this nasal congestion. Why shall we have the nasal congestion? So why shall we have this nasal congestion here is, the cilia which is present here supposed to move the mucus that is being produced. Mucus that is being produced down to the pharynx. From the pharynx, it can be swallowed and it can be taken to the stomach, where it is lysed with the acid, digested with the acid. And at times, especially during the cold seasons, and the cilia doesn't move much. It becomes very sluggish, becomes very lethargic, and it becomes very sluggish. As a result of that, we have this nasal congestion. All the mucus gets trapped there, and you have this runny nose. With this watery mucus slipping out of the nose. since these people experience, these people experience the nasal congestion, they inhale through the nose, because we have this connection here directly, right, the pharynx. So directly to the connection that is there, so it can be taken to the lungs, and this is very problematic, right? Breathing through mouth is the problematic thing to do. Why is it is problematic here is, in the nasal chamber we have all these protective mechanisms in the form of cilia, in the form of mucus lining, in the form of concave. All this protective apparatus is there here. All this protective apparatus is there. But when you take out the oral cavity, so you don't have all this protective apparatus. So whatever the substances that is there in the air are directly being taken to the lungs, and there can be harmful effects. There can be harmful effects to the lungs, right? The breathing can get affected if you constantly take the air through mouth, which is not advised. Yes, so that is the important function of the nasal cavity and the larynx, right? So we shall see the next aspects in the next lesson. That is it for in this lesson. Yes, now please give a like. Thank you all.